Warm welcome to all of you to this course on organizational behavior. Today we are going to look at the first section of the introduction chapter. I am Dr. MP Ganesh. I am an associate professor in the Department of Liberal Arts, IIT Hyderabad. If you want to know more about me, you can click the link below and you can get to know about my professional background. So this is the outline of the entire first chapter. So these are the topics which we are going to cover in this first chapter. In this first session, on this first lecture today, we are going to look at the first point, which is how do we define organization behavior and organizational behavior. If you want to understand or if you want to define organizational behavior, we need to understand what is an organization. We need to define what is an organization. Just go through this picture in this slide and take a minute and think what comes to your mind. So words like collaboration, words like coordination, words like collective effort, words like arrangement of people. So these are some terms which might come to your mind, isn't it? In fact, these are the words which can be associated with the word organization. Okay, so in that case, can you define what is an organization? Just take a minute more and think and try to define what is an organization. Because in our day-to-day life, organizations play a very important role. We are part of an organization as a student or an employee. The kind of products which we use or the kind of services we get in our day-to-day life are made by organization or served by organizations. So organizations, knowingly or unknowingly, play a very important role in our day-to-day life. So just pause for a minute and think, how will you define an organization? Many people use this word organization as a group of people, or group of people as one term which can be used to define an organization. Some people use group of people coming together as a definition, and better way to define is group of people coming together and trying to achieve something collectively. So in a very simple words, organizations can be defined as group of people coming together to achieve a common goal. Many a times this is what I get as an answer when we ask this question in my class, in my OB class. So this is one simple way of defining what is an organization, but let's look at an elaborate way of, or a more precise way of defining what is an organization or understanding what is an organization. The word organization comes from the term organizing. So if you are a management student, you would have heard of the 5 functions of management. So planning, organizing, leading, controlling, coordinating. So these are considered to be the 5 functions of management, and organizing is one important function of management. So organizations involve organizing, or organizing is a key activity in any organization. So organizations, the major thing organizations do is organizing things within them so that they achieve something bigger. Okay, so what is organizing? Organizing is nothing but arranging. So what is arranged within an organization? One, people are arranged. People are given specific designations. Tasks are defined. For each designation, people are assigned tasks, or they are told what they have to do. Tasks are distributed. 3, each of these designations also have a certain level of authority or power to execute those tasks. So in a very simple way of understanding organizing is arranging tasks people, and authority. So organizations involve these three things in a very systematic manner. Okay. So if you look at the second point in this slide, you will see it is defined as a deliberate arrangement of people to accomplish some specific purpose. So let's understand what is deliberate arrangement. So deliberate arrangement is nothing but a very rational way of, or very logical way of arranging all these things. So in that sense, it is not by random things happen. For example, let's say a family. Okay, is a family an organization or not an organization? It is not an organization, because whatever happens within a family is not deliberately or consciously or very systematically defined beforehand. So it all happens, or it all happens through a flow, isn't it? People in a family, they assume this is what they have to do. They understand each other without clearly prescribing, many a times clearly prescribing what is expected out of each other, and they do their task. But in an organization, everything is like deliberately arranged, which means everything is like clearly written down, everything is like clearly defined, everything is like planned beforehand. So in that sense, organizations are more systematic in nature compared to other social units like a family. Organizations are more systematically driven or rationally driven. Okay, so this is one way of defining an organization, but again there can be problems in this definition. For example, many times organizations, even business organizations, are not rigidly planned or rigidly defined in terms of what has to be done, in terms of task description or in terms of their goals and things like that. So we cannot use only this definition to understand what is an organization. So an elaborate way of understanding what is an organization is the third point which is given in this slide, which is an organization is a consciously coordinated social entity with an identifiable boundary that functions on a relatively continuous basis to achieve a common goal or set of goals. Okay, so I have underlined few terms in this definition. Why I have underlined them is to, one, elaborate on what they mean, two, to critique those terminologies, or to question whether these terminologies really define an organization or not. Okay, so first we'll look at each of these terms and try to understand what they mean. So organization is a consciously coordinated social entity. Consciously coordinated means a systematic, or organization is something which adopts very systemic processes, very rational processes to run its day-to-day activities, or to operate on a day-to-day basis. So to challenge whether organizations are consciously coordinated or not, like I said earlier, many cases day-to-day activities in an organization, some of it is planned, some of it happens through mutual understanding between people, and especially when there are a lot of other factors which change within the organization and outside the organization, which is not predictable, many times consciously coordinating can be challenged. Okay, so there are a lot of unplanned things which can also happen within the organization. For example, there are some organizations which are like very, very organic in nature, which means they don't they don't plan for a long term. They actually evolve over a period of time. Whenever there is a new opportunity, the organization takes advantages of that opportunity and enters into that particular market. So the strategy is not clearly defined. Vis-a-vis, some organizations are very mechanistic in nature, which means they are like clearly defined way of where we have to be there in 5 years, what kind of markets we need to operate, what kind of businesses we should do. So all those things are clearly defined. So it's not always true that organizations succeed when they are very mechanistic. In fact, many of the successful organizations are very organic in nature, which evolve. They are not very consciously coordinated. They are very instinctively, or they are driven by gut feelings of their CEOs. So the term consciously coordinated, we need to we cannot take it as a 100% way of defining an organization. The second word, which is social entity. So organizations, so what is social entity? Social entity means organizations are social groups, or organizations have people. So my question is, let's say there is I give you a project, as a class project, a course project, where I assign 3-4 members in a particular group and ask them to do a project. Okay, so in that sense, they are also social entity. They are also consciously coordinated. There is a plan involved. There is a structure involved, and also there is a common goal, like this definition. So can we call this project group as a organization? Many times no, because this is a team. This is a work team. Why it is a work team? In fact, more specifically, it's a project team, because one, size of this group is small. Two, the goals are very time bound, which means after the project ends, this group may not exist. Okay, so the first idea of how many people should be there to define a group as an organization vis-a-vis a team is a question mark. Okay, so usually when the size of the group is less than 8 or less than 10, they are called as team. When they are bigger, there are other names. So usually people visualize organizations as entities which have 100 or 1,000 people or 10,000 people. So larger organizations, there are organizations which are like tens and thousands of people. So social entity means there should be some number of people, at least some number of people should as members of the organization. But again, the question now is the question of ideal size. We can challenge that idea. So for example, in recent days, smaller organizations are becoming more and more successful and more popular. For example, there are startups which have 2 or 3 people, which they also are very successful. There are organizations which operate on a very large scale, but number of people are relatively less compared to some so-called big organizations. So size of an organization is again, is a question mark. So some people say at least one person should be there to call it as an organization. There are one-person organizations also. Maybe in future there might be organizations which may not even have people. The entire organization is operated by an algorithm. So it can also happen. So it's in future, we don't know. Okay. So again, the idea of size can be questioned. The third term, identifiable boundary, which means organizations should have boundaries. For example, many of these groups, interest groups or groups which come together out of some common interest, they may not have very clear-cut boundary. When I say boundary, it can be a physical boundary or it can be a social boundary or both. Okay, so physical boundary is there may not be a place from which they operate. Okay, for example, there is a fan club of a particular movie actor or a cinema star. So this fan club may not be an organization because many of them may be scattered around different places. Even though there's a common interest or a common goal, they might be scattered across various places. So in that sense, they may not have a physical boundary. Okay, social boundary is sense of belongingness. Okay, so sense of belongingness is difficult to quantify because it's more subjective in nature. Okay, it's more psychological in nature. So let's say if I'm part of an organization as a formal member, let's say if I'm part of IIT Hyderabad, okay, So by being a formal member of IIT Hyderabad doesn't mean that I will have this sense of belongingness. But many a times organizations try to instigate or try to make that happen among its members. For example, organizations try to give uniforms to all the employees to make them feel they are all one and they are part of the organization. You also get an ID card which has a number which says this is what your identity in this organization. So the sense of identity also plays a very important role in defining the boundary. So the idea of boundary is also to differentiate who's an insider and who's an outsider. So physical boundary, having a physical boundary which is a physical place to operate, also defines who's an insider, who's an outsider. Social boundary, sense of belongingness, also makes people feel whether they are part of the organization or they are not part of the organization. So organizations try to have these boundaries. Okay, one, to have a physical boundary, two, to inculcate sense of belongingness so that there is a sense of being an insider versus somebody who is outside. Okay, so this is the idea of boundary. But again, if you want to challenge this idea of boundary as part of the definition of organization, should all organizations have physical boundaries? Or in other words, should organizations have a physical place from which they will operate? In fact, in recent days, more and more organizations are coming up with this new way of working, which is co-working, which means many people will work from home, or people are dispersed across the globe. They may work from their own place, but they are part of the organization. We call them virtual organizations. So that also happens. Maybe in near future there may not be an office space. Everybody is like connected through internet, and they may sit from different places and work as part of an organization which is virtual. So physical boundary, the idea of physical boundary is also becoming very vague nowadays. To social boundary, sense of belongingness. So earlier organizations involved people working in that organization for many years. So sense of belongingness was very strong. For example, being an IITian, I feel proud about being an IITian. Or even if I don't work in this organization, if I retire from this organization, I would be proud to call myself an IITian. Okay, and many times people work in the same organization at one given point of time. But in recent days, this way of working is also changing. For example, there is this idea called temp workers. So temp workers are workers who work for a short duration, okay, in a project. But when they work in the project, they are part of the organization. When they are not, once the project is over, they more like freelancers, they quit the organization and work in another project. Or there can be other ways of working also. In extreme forms, as a freelancer, I might be working in different organizations at the same time. Okay, so where do my sense of belongingness exist, or where will I consider to be, what is my organization? So the sense of social belongingness is also becoming very vague. So the point I'm trying to say is the idea of boundary, both physical and social, is becoming more and more vague nowadays. Okay, so we cannot use this definition as a strict way of defining what is an organization. Okay, so even consciously coordinated is not a very rigid thing. Social entity can be questioned. How many people should exist? And boundary can also be challenged. Now let's see continuous as a way of defining an organization. Continuous means organizations should be there for long duration. So when you say long duration, what do you mean by long duration? Like I said, there are like huge or social units which have big size, or social units which have many people, may not exist for longer period of time. They work on a project and then they stop to exist. They cease to exist. So they are not organizations. For example, a movie making group. Let's say I'm making a Hollywood movie, which is like the budget is like a huge budget, and there are like 500 to 1,000 people working in this movie making unit. But after the movie is made, this particular unit doesn't exist in the same form. People move away to different projects. So can you call this as an organization? No, we cannot. But let's take another organization, IIT Hyderabad, let's say, okay, or IIT Madras, or your organization. They exist for a very long period of time, okay. But again, the question is, when will you call this duration as a long duration? Is it 10 years? Is it 50 years, or is it 100 years? We don't know, okay. So especially in recent years, the lifespan of the organization is becoming shorter. Many organizations, they are there for 5 years, 10 years, they merge with some other organization, or they become a newer organization, or they are sold off, they don't exist. So the lifespan of the organization is also becoming small. So in that sense, we cannot use a particular year or particular duration to say this is what we can call it as a continuous basis. So again, it becomes difficult to define. Okay. So the last two terms, goal and goals. When you say organization should have goals, the question of whose goals are they? Because organizations have different stakeholders. For example, if you take an organization like your college or your education institution, there are multiple stakeholders. There are administrators, which is administrative staff. There are teaching staff. There are students. There are other stakeholders like the temporary workers. There are many groups in an organization. So each of those groups have different set of goals. So when you say there are different people have different set of goals, what should be the common goal? Take an example. So the example which I gave was an education institution. Let's take a business organization. What should be the goal of the business organization? Can there be one goal, or there can be few goals where all of the stakeholders agree? Again, it is very difficult. For a business organization, profit can be a goal. But again, as an employee, is profit my only goal? Profit can be the goal of the shareholders, but as an employee, my goal is not necessarily my company should make profit. It is one of the goal, but for me, a comfortable workplace, a secure job, opportunities to learn and grow can be my goals. Similarly, in a business organization, consumers are stakeholders. What their goal or what they expect from the organization is not necessarily profit. For them, it should be good products, value, something which gives them value, something which is useful for them, something which is safe to use, and things like that. Okay. So this idea of an organization as collection of many groups makes it difficult to define one goal or fewer goals for the organization. Okay. In fact, that is what makes organizations an interesting unit of analysis. Okay. So for time being, I'll pause here, and I'll summarize what we try to do with with this way of defining an organization. So what we are trying to do here is we are trying to question different terminologies used to define organization. Why I am doing it? Because to make you think about organization as an entity is very difficult to define, and these definitions are changing over a period of time. Okay, the newer forms of organizations are trying to break away from this classical way of defining what is an organization. There are different newer forms of organizations which come into existence, and that is what makes us that is what makes our job difficult as students or learners of organizational behavior, because there are different newer forms of organizations emerging. Okay. So now the second part, of organizational behavior, organization and behavior. So what is behavior? Okay, so in psychology, psychology is considered to be study of behavior. Okay, so what is behavior? In a very simple way, behavior is a response to a stimuli. So for example, you're supposed to learn through what I am teaching or what I am lecturing. So learning is a behavior or a response which happens because of the stimuli which you get, which is my lecture. Okay, so learning is a behavior which is a response to a stimuli which is my lecture. Okay, let's say you are sneezing. Okay, is it a behavior? In a very technical sense, it is a behavior because there is a stimuli which is something which is allergic or irritant which made you sneeze. So, but sneezing is an involuntary behavior. If you look at the definition, sneezing is an involuntary behavior. Learning is a voluntary behavior. You can choose to learn. Okay, behaviors can be overt or covert. Overt means visible behavior. For example, if you are bored because of this lecture, you might yawn, which is very visible behavior. Covert behavior is something which happens inside. You get bored, but you may not show. Let's say if it is a face-to-face class, some of you may not yawn. You will switch off your mind. You will daydream. So daydreaming is a covert behavior. Behavior can be conscious or subconscious. Conscious means you know what you are doing. Okay. For example, in classroom, some students, when the class is not interesting, they will do something else. They will look at the mobile phone. They will try to read something else, things like that. That is a conscious behavior. Subconscious means, for example, let's say in some classes people nod. When there is an interesting lecture, people will shake their head, so that they may not even know they are doing it. They are subconsciously doing it without even being aware. They do this. So that is subconscious. So behaviors can be conscious, behaviors can be subconscious. Behaviors can be external, behaviors can be internal. For example, if you are hungry, okay, so hunger, your stomach grumble, makes noises. So that is internal. External is you feel irritated. So that is external. So behavior is like the whole range of things we do, whether it is internal, external, consciously doing or unconsciously doing. You have control over what you are doing, you don't have control over what you are doing. All these things are behaviors. But one necessity is there should be a stimulus. There should be something which makes it happen. Okay. But again, you may question, should this stimulus be whether the stimuli be internal or external? It is again depends, because there are some things which stimuli happens from within. For example, you are worried, you are scared. Sometimes there may not be a real threat. Sometimes there may not be a real cause for your worry. Most of the things might be internal overthinking. Okay, so stimuli can be internal also. The trigger to your behavior can be internal also. It can be external also. So this is what is behavior. So behavior is actually what we do as people. Internal, external, conscious, unconscious, voluntary, involuntary. Okay. So what is organizational behavior? Organizational behavior is understanding all these behaviors. May not necessarily sneezing, why people sneeze in organization, but what makes people motivated to work, or what makes people perform better than others, and things like that. Okay. So organizational behavior is understanding humans' behavior at work. When you say human behavior, it can be of many levels. It can be at individual level, which is like their motivation, attitude, perception, and things like that. It can be interpersonal. Interpersonal means between people, conflict, cooperation, and things like that. Group dynamics, in more than two people, in groups, in teams, what kind of things happen within a team. So the unit of analysis in organizational behavior can be individual, can be interpersonal between people, or it can also be larger groups. Okay. So in simple words, organizational behavior is nothing but systematically studying human behavior in organizational settings. When you say systematically, it means using scientific methods. It's not like you watch people and make assumptions. It's not like through work experience you understand and you try to predict human behavior. So that I'm not criticizing learning through experience, but systematic study means in a very scientific way, in a very controlled way, in a very rational way, we try to understand human behavior. So how does organization behavior do it? Through building lot of research studies. Through the findings of the research studies, we also come up with newer theories. We also come up with models, conceptual models, empirical models to understand human behavior. Okay. So in fact, many of the theories which we are going to talk about in our course, this course has very strong empirical studies, or they are based out of many years of research. Okay. So they're not just gut feeling assumptions. Okay. They are based out of very strong research, empirical, systematic study. Okay. So this is what we are going to look at today, and in fact I think we have fairly covered the idea of, or fairly covered the definition of organizational behavior. I'll quickly summarize. We looked at what is an organization, the definition of organization, the complexities of defining what is an organization, why it is important to understand the complexities, because as students of organizational behavior, we need to understand newer forms of organizations are emerging. We cannot generalize or we cannot generalize one thing to all organization. Two, we also looked at the definition of behavior. What is a behavior? Behavior is a response to a stimuli. It can be internal, external, conscious, unconscious, all those things. Organizational behavior. Three, what is organizational behavior? Understanding human behavior in workplace, which can be at different levels. And also it's not unlike understanding behavior through day-to-day experiences. Organizational behavior is different because it is a systematic field which involves a lot of theory building and empirical testing. Okay, I'll stop here. Before we end this lecture, I would like to give you a small homework. Okay, country. Let's take this social group country. Using the definition which we saw, what is an organization, will you classify country as an organization or something else? Okay, because this is a very the idea of country is like very complex. Okay, so can you fit this social group country as an organization or something else? Okay, so just think. In the next lecture we will see why or why not country is an organization. Okay, have a good day.